Let's celebrate together this morning. Yeah. Let's stand up and celebrate, all right? Stand up and celebrate. Man, this is a great day, a great morning, a great opportunity. Yes. Let's celebrate. You know what? We had the greatest comeback that has ever been established, has ever been seen in the world. I mean, this is even better than Kansas coming back, right? This is better for all you Kansas fans and for all you North Carolina fans. I'm sorry, but this is even greater than that because we were dead in the grave. We were dead. It was Friday, and Tony Campolo has just said it so well. It was Friday, but Sunday is here, all right? Let's celebrate together. Man. There is every day, this is the reason for every day of your life, no matter what. We're going to talk about tragedy here, the tragedy of the cross. Every day comes into our lives and it stops us. Sometimes we just hit it face on and we can't even imagine going on another minute, another day. But we saw right there that we have new life. We have new life in Jesus Christ. Man, it's great. Last night, Damien said, before you sit down, Damien said that we had 3 baptisms. What was so wonderful was Juanita Reynolds came at the very end of what we were doing in worship and the witness of these other baptisms, the witness of one man on mission and sharing with his cousin about Jesus Christ. His cousin drove here from Topeka, Kansas, to be with us last night so that he could be baptized right here with us. But even inside with that, when Juanita came forward, she said to me, and Juanita and I have talked and we've prayed a lot together, and she loves Carterville, she loves the church, she loves the energy of what this church brings and the Holy Spirit brings her. And she said, Robin, I am so fearful of water, but I've never been baptized. And I've got to do it. And I said, well, we'll get this. We'll get Keith Golubski, one of our strongest guys on staff. He'll take care of you. He'll take care of you. And Juanita, when she went backstage, one of the sons of one of our worship leaders was backstage back there and saw her and began to talk to her and was really excited about her baptism last night. And so, when she came up and she was so fearful, and I don't say this to be funny, but Juanita had to sit down on the steps and basically slide down into the baptistry. So we've had a lot of discussion last night from people that were watching that maybe we just need to slide into the baptistry. We're not going to do that, but that was discussion last night. She had to slip down in each step to be able to get in there, to overcome with her own weaknesses, to stand there. But here's what the beauty of it was. It was after that, Juanita, of course, was crying. Keith said she came up out of that water. You could see the joy in her face. But when we finally got her down and she got back to the dressing room, there was Cal, and he wanted to talk to her. He just wanted to talk to her, and he told Jamie, she looks so beautiful. She looks so beautiful. When a child can see the beauty of new life, why can't we? Why can't we see the beauty of new life? Huh? Listen, you can be seated there. You can be seated. The beauty of new life. With the problem when we come to this weekend and we come and we think every time we look and we're reading through the Gospels and we come to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, we, like those disciples, and especially today, we're going to be focusing on John. All he could see was the cross. All he could see was the cross. All he could see was the burial clothes that came with the cross. And with that tragedy, he could see no farther. Now, I don't know about you, but I have never been in this discussion at a dinner date, on a dinner date with another couple, with anyone else at dinner. It hit me many, many years ago. And maybe the hardest thing in your life that you have ever done is that, some of us, you had to get up and give a speech in school. My speech teacher, I'm sure that every Sunday she rolls over in her grave, wherever she's at, because the first speech I ever did was supposed to be a minute. I went 30 seconds. The next speech was 3 minutes. I went 1 minute. And then when we did our 5-minute speech, I went 2.5 minutes. And she said, Mr. Sigars, you're never going to be a public speaker. Did I fool her? Did I fool her? I don't know what the hardest thing you've ever done in life. I know that we had some people here last night, like myself, belonging to that fraternity, where maybe you've received the news of cancer. And maybe that's the hardest thing in your life, or you've been there with a spouse or a child or a parent that has passed away. Maybe you've been there. And I know that's hard. I know my own experience. I know that. I know what that is like. But you know what the hardest thing for me was? Yes, it was to be there and to watch the person that you love, the mother of your children, to leave this world to go to another world. That was very hard. But you know the hardest thing is the next day when the funeral home called. And they said, Robin, you need to pick out some burial clothes. You know what I mean? You need to pick out some burial clothes, and you stand in that closet. Something you never thought, you never imagined you would do, and you go through the closet and you begin to look at dresses, and you begin to look at outfits, and you begin to remember, and you go over all the memories, and the tragedy just keeps coming back and flowing over you and flowing over you and flowing over you. And those grave clothes speak so powerfully to it's over. To it's over. You see, when we see only the cross, when we see what John saw, when we see what the other apostles saw, when we see the people there, we see this cross, and we move no farther than the cross. We can't see past it to the triumph. We can only see the tragedy and what happened on the cross, and we can never see past it. I'm sure on that Saturday, as those disciples sat alone, and most people believed that they were in the upper room together, that they began to wonder upon their own minds and heart, what could we have done different? I'm sure Peter, he went back over. I tried to stop him. Every time he told us that he was going to go to Jerusalem and he was going to be betrayed, he was going to stand on trial before the religious leaders. They were going to falsely accuse him. They were going to beat him, and finally they were going to crucify him. I tried to stop him. If you remember, Jesus told him to get behind him because he was Satan. He was looking at the things of the world. He might have wondered, if I'd only tried a little bit harder. Maybe one of them said, if we'd only left the garden sooner, if we'd have just left the garden sooner, we were all so tired, we were all sleeping, and we had told him, Jesus, let's just go back. Let's go back where we can sleep. We can pray in the upper room. Let's go back there. And then they might have wondered, Judas, what if we'd have stopped Judas? What if we knew he was a betrayer, but what if we'd have stopped him? This would have never happened. I wonder. And we live our lives the same way sometimes, wondering about what we should have done. What could have happened if we'd have done things different, because we always stop at the cross. And we never look beyond the cross to see the empty grave clothes that represent the triumph and demonstrate the power of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. John writes for us. I'd like to ask you to take your Bibles out to John the 19th chapter, because he writes about the burial clothes. The burial clothes became very significant for the Apostle John. And in John the 19th chapter, he sets up the story by beginning to talk about the burial clothes. In the 38th verse, it says, afterwards, Joseph of Arimathea, who had been a secret disciple. Now, don't stop there when you're ever reading through this. I want you to contemplate it, but we're going to explain this in just a moment. This secret disciple, I don't want you to think that he was like a secret agent, that nobody knew what he was. You're going to find out. You can write down some scripture here. You'll be able to go and see that, no. I think that God was protecting him. I think God was protecting another group of people, and this whole time they're protecting them. These people are learning more and more about the Messiah, and they're studying more and more about the Messiah to come to this very moment in time. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon at this time. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Passover lamb was slaughtered, was killed. The blood of the Passover lamb was drawn and was taken and spread out over in symbolic spreading of cleansing over the people. At 3 o'clock, Jesus, right here in John, said, it is finished. Significant, isn't it? And he knew, I believe that Joseph of Arimathea knew exactly what he was doing. He asked Pilate for permission to take down Jesus' body. When Pilate gave permission, Joseph came and took the body away. With him came Nicodemus, the man who had come to Jesus at night. If you remember that in John, the 3rd chapter. He brought about 75 pounds of perfumed ointment made from myrrh and aloes. Following the Jewish burial custom, they wrapped Jesus' body with spices in long sheets of linen cloth. The place of the crucifixion was near a garden, very close, near at hand, where there was a new tomb, never been used before. And so, because it was the day of preparation for the Jewish Passover, and since the tomb was close at hand, they laid Jesus there. Those burial clothes, so significant, because to John, it basically said it's over. We all have symbols of tragedy. We all have symbols of someone saying it's over. We have that in that drawer. We have that death certificate that said it's over. We have the envelope with the divorce papers that said it's over. We have the file filled with our medical conditions and what they're going to do to you and what they do to us. We have that file filled explaining all that is going to take place. Some of us have the scars. We have the scars left on our bodies to remind us of that hospital stay and that extension and what went on with our lives. And even some of us put a cross on our wall. All to remind us in the symbols of tragedy, but yet today they all stand for symbols of triumph. They stand for the symbols of the new life that Jesus Christ promised us. And those burial clothes that were wrapped around Jesus' body, so significant. Now Joseph, as I said, and Nicodemus both, Joseph belonged to a very unique group of people. You can read about it in Luke, the 23rd chapter, verses 50 through 51. You see, Joseph of Arimathea was a group of people, a group of men that belonged to the sect of the Pharisees that were studying about the Messiah. They believed that Jesus Christ was the Messiah. That's why I believe he was there at 3 o'clock. That's why I believe he was there with these burial clothes in a new tomb not far away. I believe that he was able to see the cross and look beyond it because he knew the Messiah must die. Nicodemus was also a believer of Jesus Christ. You can read in John the 7th chapter in verses 50 through 52 where Nicodemus, or the Pharisees, accuse Nicodemus when he tries to defend Jesus. They accuse him, what, are you from Galilee also? Are you one of his disciples? These two men were not secret. They were fearful, but they were not secret. And they show up to take the body just at the precise time to wrap it in those linen clothes. They saw the cross, but they saw beyond it. You see, we get stuck so often, just like John, where we say it's over. This morning, I know many of us have gathered, many of us that are watching, many of us are here. We're here to celebrate Easter, but so often we are right now in the midst of saying it's over. It's over. We're in the midst of, like John, going, I gave up my business. I sold off my business to follow Jesus for the last 3 years. Peter even told Jesus that we've given up our homes, we've given up our families to follow you, Jesus. I think he says it's over, and I know that so often we too come in whatever you're going through, we stop at the cross. But we've sang this morning, we are no longer at the cross. We are no longer beggars. We are no longer prisoners. We have moved beyond the burial clothes. The burial clothes. The last thing I would say about him, it says there that Nicodemus brought 75 pounds of ointment, spices, and myrrh. 75 pounds. 75 pounds is the formula that would be used for a king. It was a formula that they would embalm a king. The Jewish people had not had a king. They had not had a king for over 100 years. And they brought the symbol of a king. You see, they saw beyond the tragedy. But John couldn't get past it. But he's writing to you and I, and he's mentioning these burial clothes because everything changes in the tomb. In John the 20th chapter, in verses 1 through 10, we read, early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away. Now we know in reading Matthew and Luke that she came with other women. She came to the entrance and she saw the stone rolled away from the entrance. Now get that, I just say it right now. Look what she does next. She ran. She didn't go inside the tomb. She didn't look inside the tomb. She saw the outward evidence. All she saw was the evidence of the tragedy. And she assumed, she began to believe what obviously they had talked about. They themselves were worried what might take place. She ran and she found Simon Peter and the other disciple. And she said, they've taken the Lord's body out of the tomb and we don't know where they've put him. So Peter and the other disciple started out for the tomb. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He stooped and he looked in and he saw. We're going to see 3 different words for seeing something. He looked in and he saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. Then Simon Peter arrived and he went inside and he also noticed. He looked and he saw the linen wrappings lying there while the cloth that had been covering Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. Then the disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and here he saw, get this, and he believed. For until then, they still hadn't understood the scriptures that said Jesus must rise from the dead, and then they went home. Those empty clothes. He doesn't mention an empty tomb. He mentions the empty clothes. He gets right down to finally be able to see and to look in. Now, of course, we use our imagination, and most people just believe, say John was younger than Peter. Obviously, he could outrun Peter, and he could get there first. I don't know. I have a wild and big imagination. I could just imagine Mary bursting into the upper room where these men are at and said, she's frantic. She's frantic. They've taken him. They've taken him. They've taken Jesus. I imagine at that moment in time, in my mind and my heart, that John got up and he burst out of that room. I think Peter, like myself, was old and couldn't get around as well. And so, he's getting up going, oh, man, oh. Peter, the door from John is flapping back against the wood. And Peter gets out. He has to do a little stretching before he can run, But it's not far. Remember, this tomb's not far away, maybe a few blocks. Remember, Jerusalem would be very compact. So Peter takes out running. But I said there are three reasons. There are three words there. Up to see, to look in. I believe that when John got there, the first one is we have in the New Living Testament, the word is that he stooped and he looked in. He stooped and he looked in. He looked in to observe. He looks in and he sees what has happened. He in his mind are thinking someone has stolen the body. He looks in and he observes what he sees. And then I believe he stands up, he's shocked. You see, he knows beyond a shadow of doubt, no one comes off the cross alive. No one. The Roman soldiers will not take you off of the cross. As a matter of fact, if you were not dead, and it happens to not be the Passover, when the Pharisees made the request that they made, they would leave you on the cross. The cross would be not much taller than this one right here, so that wild dogs could come up at nighttime when everyone else is gone, and wild dogs could eat the bottom half of your body away. If you weren't dead, they left you there. They were going to make you dead. That's why also Jesus, because to answer prophecy, but he was also, the Spirit was placed in his side. John knew he was dead. Now Peter gets there, and Peter just doesn't stoop. Peter gets in and he gets in the tomb. But it's a different word, but it means the same thing. He moves in and he just observes. He's even closer now. He comes in closer than John, and he just observes what is going on. But then finally the final word for what John did as he's shocked, as Peter goes in and he's putting it all together in his mind, this time he gets down. And he gets in. And the word totally changes now. It's still that he saw something, but now he sees it to experience it. Now he looks around and he begins to think, if somebody stole the body of Jesus Christ, I can't believe they would come. There's Roman soldiers out there. There's some way scared them to faint. They rolled the stone away. They broke the seal. They rolled the stone back up out of the way, and they came in. I can't imagine they would take the time to just rip the grave clothes off of this body, 75 pounds. No, if we're going to steal the body, pick it up, let's go. And then there's no grave clothes. He's observing. I believe he might have even reached over and touched. They're looking. He's observing to experience that it looks like this body just evaporated out of those tomb clothes. This body just disappeared. Some people believe in the Shroud of Turin, and maybe you've read about it. They believe there's burnt spots on the shroud to just prove the reality that when that body left there was a burning sensation so sudden. But I want you to see he's experiencing it. You see, before we can ever move past the tragedy of the cross, we have to experience the empty grave clothes. We have to experience with our minds and hearts to be moved the fact, the reality that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. It's experience. It's not enough to look. It's not enough to just see. We have got to put it together to realize I've got to change my life. And then finally, in the rest of the part of that chapter right there, Mary comes back. As they leave, Mary comes back. And now she finally looks in and she sees the angels. I just think it's so significant that those angels don't scare her. She looks in. She looks in to see those angels. And then they ask, woman, who are you looking for? And she doesn't even tell them, where have you taken his body? Where have you taken him? And then I have to think this, again, my imagination. What caused her to leave? Why didn't she wait for an answer? I believe, this is just me. There's no text of this at all. I just believe that the angels probably looking at her finally looked up and they saw him. They saw Jesus. She backs out of the tomb and she falls before what she sees as a man there. But why didn't she recognize him? You see, Jesus had no other clothes. He was stripped naked on the cross. I believe that she couldn't understand. She couldn't see who it was because Jesus had a new glorified body. I believe she couldn't see who it was because he was wearing new glorified clothes, possibly the same clothes that he wore in the transfiguration. I believe that she couldn't see who he was, and he asked her the same question, who are you looking for? And she answers the same way, oh, tell me where you put him. And then Jesus, for her experience, says, Mary. That's when she cries out to who he really was, oh, Rabboni, you are the teacher, you are the one, you are the one. You see, my friends, until we experience the grace, until we truly experience and live our lives for God, we'll never move past the tragedy of the cross to the triumph of the empty clothes. Walter Winogren wrote a story many years ago about a young man. It was as if he was dreaming of his own life. But he found himself in the inner city, in the ghetto of his city, and there he saw a young man, 6'4", he said, muscles, strong voice, and obviously he could work any job he wanted to work anywhere just by looking at him and understanding his intelligence. But there he was in the inner city with a wheelbarrow. And with that wheelbarrow, he pushed it around and he would yell, rags, rags, new rags for old. And Walter said, I watched and I was caught by what he was doing, and so I followed him in my dream. And pretty soon as he worked his way through the ghetto, in the back alley of a ghetto, we came to a back porch where a woman sat there and she was crying into a rag. It was a dirty rag. And she was weeping violently into this rag. And he said the rag man put down his wheelbarrow and he stepped around, broken toys and empty bottles and Pampers until he came to the woman. And he just reached out and touched her. And when he touched her, she looked up and he gently reached out and he took her dirty rag and he took it from her. And in place of the dirty rag, he reached into his wheelbarrow and he took out a brand new handkerchief. And he said, when I looked at the lady and he handed it to her, her tears were gone, her face was clean, her eyes were bright, and there was a wonderful smile on her face. But he said, I watched the rag man as he began to back away. He took the rag and he placed it over his face. He began to weep violently and he cried and he cried and he cried. And he walked back to the wheelbarrow crying and he picked it up. And in tears, he began to push the wheelbarrow once again, and I followed him until we ended up out on the street. And there, again on a front porch, sat a little boy, and he was crying, and I could tell he was in pain. His eyes were just empty from the abuse. There was a bandage on his head. The bandage was full of blood. And the ragman went over, and tears rolling down his eyes, he took from the young man the bandage and he placed it upon his own head. And from there, suddenly I looked at the ragman and he began to bleed. The blood, it was obviously his wound. He began to bleed down, and from his wheelbarrow, he took a beautiful new hat. And he placed it upon the young man. He placed it upon him so that he was happy again. His smile was there and his eyes were bright and light, but the ragman was crying, and the ragman was broken because of the lives that he had taken upon himself. He said, but I couldn't stop. I followed the ragman, and we got up. He picked up his wheelbarrow and he began to move again. He began to move down the street till he came to a man leaning against a pole, and he's crying. And he asked the young man, are you going to work? The young man said, no. And he said, don't you have a job? And the young man moved away from the pole. When he moved away from the pole, it was obvious that he only had one arm. And the young man said, what do you mean, work? And the ragman moved over. He said, I watched what he did. I just couldn't believe it. The ragman went over and he took from him his coat. And when he took from him his coat, he reached and took his own coat off of him. And when he placed his coat upon him, the young man's arm was right there. It was the arm of the ragman. And I looked at the ragman, and suddenly the ragman's arm was gone. He now had only one arm, and he was crying and he was bleeding. And he picked up his wheelbarrow with his one arm, and he held on and he moved through the crowd slowly. It wasn't very far as I followed him. And he stopped next to a lump. It was an old drunk laying there. covered up in a green army blanket. And the rag man looked at him. And he bent down next to him and he took the blanket. He took it off of the man as the man woke up and looked at him through bleary eyes. But then suddenly the rag man took a new suit of clothes. And he put them on, the drunk, as he stood up, and suddenly his hair was combed. His eyes were not drunk anymore. They were light with new life. And he said, I watched the rag man begin to stumble from the intoxication in his one arm and his crying and his bleeding. He picked up the wheelbarrow and he said, now I couldn't leave. I couldn't take my eyes off of the rag man. We walked down the street and we went. It seemed that even in his struggling, even in what he was doing, we moved faster and faster till we found ourselves outside the city there in a garbage dump. And the rag man took his feet and he cleared some of the garbage away. And he laid down. And he took the bandage and he put it down to lay upon it. He took the blanket and he covered himself up with it. And he died. He died. He said, I was so overwhelmed. There was no junk car there. And I just sat down and slumped upon its tire. And I looked and I wept. The rag man had done such great things for people. The rag man had taken everything they had upon himself. He gave up everything he had. And now he's gone. He wrote, I don't know what happened. I fell asleep Friday night and slept all the way through Saturday. Until Sunday morning, the sun came up. And it was blinded me as I sat there against the car. And I tried to open my eyes and I tried to clear them out to see. And suddenly there before me stood up a shadow that blocked the sun. And I could see that it was the rag man. He was strong again. His arm was strong again and was there. And he carried the scar, though, on his forehead. He carried the scar of the young man. And the rag man turned and looked at me as I got up, and I stretched and I looked at him, and I began to weep, and I came to the rag man and I fell before him and I said, rag man, please make me new. And the rag man dressed me in the finest clothes I'd ever owned. In the brightest that I'd ever seen, he dressed me in new life. You see, when we can get past the cross and past the tragedies of our life, and we can truly see what Jesus Christ came to do and what we have said today, we are no longer beggars. Please, you're not a beggar. We are no longer prisoners to sin. We have been freed from sin. But my friends, I cannot end without telling you there has to be an act upon our part to set the reservation, to make the move, to ask the rag man to cleanse our lives. We have to do it. In preparing, I read a story about Ruth Ann Metzger, a famous opera singer in years past. She was invited to be the singer at a friend of hers, very wealthy friend of hers in Seattle, Washington. She was asked to be the singer at the wedding, to sing two beautiful songs. And so her and her husband Roy, they dressed. Everyone was dressed in tuxedos and everything was a beautiful wedding, and she sang, and they went to the reception. It was in the tallest building in the northwest part of the United States of America. The top 2 floors had been rented out for this wonderful big reception. She said when we got there, the bride and groom finally arrived, and they went up this huge staircase, and there was a ribbon, and they cut the ribbon for the fun and the party to begin. And people began to make their way up the staircase, up to be able to check in and to have their names, to check their names to get into the party. And when they did, when they got to the top of the stairs and she said, Ruth Ann and Roy Metzger, the maitre d' began to look down the line. And all the M's, and he looked down, he checked twice. And he says, I'm sorry, Miss Metzger, could you spell that for me? And so she spelled it out very slowly for him. He checked again and he said, I'm sorry, Miss Metzger, I do not have your name down here. And she said, but you don't understand, I'm the singer. I sang at the wedding. I'm a friend of the groom's. I was a part of the wedding ceremony. And he said, I'm sorry, Miss Metzger. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you've done. If your name is not written on this book, you can't go in. The motion for an usher to come over, and an usher came over and he said, would you please escort the Metzgers back down to their car? And she said in silence, we walked with him as he took us to a service elevator. And he said, we walked past the doors that were open and we could see the people gathering for the party. We got to see the wonderful hors d'oeuvres and the food that they were going to be celebrating with that night. And we could hear the band beginning to play. And she said, we walked to the service elevator and he opened the door and he reached in and he pressed the letter G for garage. So Roy and I stepped in and we looked at him and the doors closed. And we rode the elevator down silently, and we got to the garage. We walked to our car, and we got in silently. We'd pulled out of the garage and only gone a little ways down the road, and Roy reached over and grabbed her hand and said, Ruth, what happened? She began to cry. She said, Roy, I got the invitation. And I saw the RSVP, but I just got so busy. And then I thought, well, I'm the singer. I don't need to send it in. I'm the singer. My name will be on the list. I'm the singer. But then she said, I began to cry even more violently because I realized I'd missed out. But what overtook me was all the people that go to church every Sunday, all the people that are living in this world that think what they've done is enough. That they go, I'll just put off. We'll wait till tomorrow. We'll wait till next week. But my friends, we know within this room, we know within this week, waiting is not enough. We've got to give our lives to Jesus Christ. We've got to move past those tragedies to get to the empty tomb, to live the life of triumph. And this morning we have everything ready. As last night with 3 baptisms, we're ready for you. We can explain to you if that's it. But we know that you need to put your faith in Jesus Christ, in the faith that causes you to repent and to confess the name of Jesus Christ, to be buried in a water grave. It's all ready for you this morning as we sing. As we stand this morning, I beg you to come. There'll be people to pray with you. There'll be people to explain, but don't put off. If your reservations, if your name is not written in the Lamb's book of life, my friends, you'll be escorted. You'll be escorted out, and you'll be sent to hell. Don't let it happen. As we sing this morning, let's sing and let Jesus take over our lives. Would you stand with me and sing this morning?